The morning haze clung low to the waves, silvered by the rising sun. Above it, a Spitfire burned through the sky, chased, outnumbered, and alone. Tracers arced upward, stitching lines of fire across the clouds. The Merlin engine screamed in protest, then silence. The fighter spiraled down, trailing smoke like a dying comet. It hit the sea with a shattering hiss. Within seconds, debris scattered across the surface. A wingtip, an oil slick, a man. The pilot, soaked and stunned, clung to a yellow dinghy half inflated by trembling hands. Around him, nothing but cold water and horizon. He looked up once, contrails fading above, and knew he should be gone. Lost to the channel. Forgotten by noon. But then, the hum of engines returned. Not German. British. A silver biplane, an amphibious walrus, descended through the mist, wings dripping. It circled once, splashed down beside him, and hauled him aboard. Within 15 minutes, he was bound for Dover. Alive. Across the sea in France, Luftwaffe officers recorded yet another confirmed kill. None could explain why those same RAF pilots kept coming back. Because Britain had built something unseen, a system designed to rescue its own from the jaws of the Channel. The summer of 1940 was Britain's trial by fire. France had fallen. Europe lay under the iron heel of the Reich. The Luftwaffe, swollen with victory, turned its attention west, to the final obstacle between Hitler and domination of the continent, the skies over Britain. Every day, hundreds of German bombers and fighters swept across the Channel, escorted by Messerschmitt Bf-109s. They came to destroy the Royal Air Force, airfield by airfield, radar by radar, until Britain was defenseless. The British called it simply the Battle of Britain. On paper, the odds were hopeless. The RAF's fighter command had barely 700 serviceable fighters and a few thousand men to fly them. The Luftwaffe could field nearly twice that number. But for all their steel and fuel, the Germans faced a problem they didn't yet understand: geography. When an RAF pilot fell in combat, he fell into friendly territory or coastal waters. When a Luftwaffe pilot went down, he landed in captivity or the sea. Britain's narrow island advantage meant every inch of the Channel became both battlefield and lifeline. In the early months, recovery was chaotic. Pilots shot down at sea had little hope beyond their own stamina. Rescue boats were slow, communication unreliable, and the sea mercilessly cold. The RAF called these downed men missing. Their squadrons quietly erased their names from chalkboards. But to Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, the head of Fighter Command, each pilot was irreplaceable. Airframes could be built again. Men could not. Trained fighter pilots were the most valuable resource Britain possessed. Saving them wasn't mercy. It was strategy. So in the spring of 1940, a small, almost invisible network began to take shape. From Dover to Plymouth, naval launches, observation posts, and rescue seaplanes were placed on constant alert. Coordination centers were built along the coast, linked to radar stations and the observer corps. Whenever a pilot went down, the chain of communication sparked instantly, from radar to station to rescue boat. By August, this embryonic system had a name: Air Sea Rescue Service. Though within the RAF, it was still spoken of in whispers. It operated quietly, without fanfare. Fast launches disguised as civilian craft. Pilots trained to deploy compact yellow dinghies. Emergency beacons coded to RAF frequencies. Every detail was tuned to a single purpose: time. The faster a pilot was found, the sooner he could return to the fight. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe believed their adversaries were simply lucky. German intelligence assumed most RAF pilots drowned after being shot down. When reports surfaced of the same British aces returning days later, disbelief rippled through German command briefings. The truth was far more advanced. Britain was fighting not just in the air, but in the water, using coordination, discipline, and ingenuity as weapons. The battle for air superiority had become a race against the sea. The English Channel, narrow, gray, and restless, became a theater of survival. Beneath its surface, tides shifted faster than rescue could travel, yet the RAF built a web of response across its length, linking men, machines, and stations into a living system that stretched from the cliffs of Dover to the estuaries of Cornwall. At its heart were the Air Sea Rescue (ASR) launches, small and fast motorboats developed from pre-war designs by the British Powerboat Company. Crewed by naval reservists, coast guards, and civilian volunteers, these sleek vessels could reach downed pilots within minutes if directed correctly. Each was armed, painted in disruptive camouflage, and equipped with stretchers, blankets, and medical kits. In the air, amphibious aircraft like the supermarine walrus and later the sea otter provided aerial coverage, slow, ungainly biplanes capable of landing directly on the water. Their crews were trained to spot the smallest flash of color, the faintest glint of sunlight off a dinghy canopy. They were the angels of the channel. Communication made it possible. The RAF's chain of radar stations, known as the Dowding system, was designed to detect incoming raids, but it also became a tool for life-saving. Radar operators tracked aircraft until contact was lost, pinpointing the approximate location of any disappearance. Observer corps posts filled in the blanks, reporting parachutes or smoke plumes from cliffs and villages. Within minutes, the information reached a nearby ASR control room. Rescue crews raced out often before the wreckage had settled. Every pilot carried a small yellow one-man dinghy, a signal flare, and increasingly a portable radio transmitter that broadcast on emergency frequency or fluorescent dye packs could stain the surrounding water bright green. Visible from miles away, these tools, simple but ingenious, transformed survival odds dramatically. By contrast, the Luftwaffe's rescue organization, the Seenodienst, was efficient at near-occupied Europe but limited over British waters. German pilots downed in the Channel faced capture or drowning. Meanwhile, the RAF recovered its men, often the same day, refitted them, and sent them back into the air by morning. German commanders began to notice disturbing patterns. Squadrons they claimed to have decimated reappeared at full strength within days. British pilots who had been confirmed destroyed were again flying over Calais and Cherbourg. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs revealed new British rescue boats darting across the Channel, escorted by fighters. The truth filtered slowly through the German command structure. Britain had industrialized survival. It wasn't only a matter of equipment, it was psychology. Each pilot knew that if he went down, he would be searched for. The unseen promise of rescue fortified their morale far more than propaganda ever could. It made them fight harder, stay longer, and trust the system that watched over them. In Berlin, disbelief gave way to irritation. Luftwaffe planners began ordering their own rescue buoys, floating steel pods stocked with rations and blankets. But the British had already moved far beyond that stage. For the RAF, this wasn't just rescue, it was warfare through coordination. And soon, the results would be impossible to ignore. For the men who flew for the RAF in 1940, the knowledge of rescue meant everything. Each mission over the Channel carried the same unspoken fear, not death, but disappearance. To vanish into the cold gray sea was to be erased from existence. To drift unseen beneath the waves that separated Britain from invasion. When the air-sea rescue system took shape, that terror changed. Pilots began to trust that someone, somewhere, was watching. Every flight briefing included a reminder, if you go down, we'll find you. It wasn't bravado, it was a promise backed by coordination and resolve. Letters from rescued pilots tell the story best, hands shaking as they wrote from hospital beds, describing the surreal moment when a launch appeared out of fog. One pilot from number 610 Squadron wrote, "I had time to count to 15 before I heard the boat. I'd been in the water less than 10 minutes. That certainty of being found strengthened the RAF from within. It bred courage not through slogans but through systems. To know you might live made you fight harder." For many, rescue wasn't just survival. It was a return to duty, a bond between man and machine, land and sea. Beyond the emotional weight, the RAF's recovery system was a tactical innovation of staggering effect. In the Battle of Britain, every pilot lost reduced the nation's air defense capacity, and Britain could not afford attrition. Training a fighter pilot took months. Replacing one was a logistical impossibility. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, who commanded No. 11 Group, realized that the only way to sustain constant air combat was to minimize human loss. Each pilot recovered represented not just a life saved, but an operational squadron kept alive. The recovery chain became an integral part of RAF planning. Missions were flown, knowing that if disaster struck, ground control could triangulate positions through radar contact, observer reports, and wireless transmission logs. It wasn't luck, it was early network warfare. The system turned geography into advantage. The same channel that separated Britain from Europe became a protective moat, lined with radar eyes and patrol craft. Rescue launches patrolled like predators, scanning waves for oil slicks and parachutes. This tactical foresight confused the Luftwaffe. Their intelligence analysts calculated that the RAF's operational pilot strength should have collapsed by mid-August. Yet every day, the same squadrons reappeared in combat, as though replenished overnight. The German high command failed to grasp that Britain had effectively closed the loop between air and sea. Where the Luftwaffe measured success in wreckage, the RAF measured endurance in minutes of rescue response. And every minute counted. The human trust and tactical brilliance were only half the story. Beneath them lay the machines and methods, the radios, dyes, codes, and equipment that made such miracles possible. Each tool carried the same mission: to beat the clock before cold and current claimed another man. Survival in the Channel was a race against physics. Water temperatures rarely climbed above 15 degrees Celsius. Hypothermia could set in within 30 minutes. Every second mattered. Amphibious and the RAF treated that reality as a scientific problem to be solved. The answer came in layers of innovation. Pilots carried compact emergency kits, a K-type one-man dinghy folded into a small pouch attached to their parachute harness. Upon landing in the water, they inflated it by pulling a CO2 cord. For added visibility, they broke open fluorescent dye packets that stained the surrounding sea a vivid green, visible from thousands of feet in the air. Aircraft were also fitted with radio beacons that broadcast distress signals on an emergency frequency. These were primitive by modern standards, but when combined with radar triangulation, they gave rescue craft a fighting chance to reach pilots before exposure set in. Coastal Command aircraft often dropped supplies to stranded airmen. Smoke flares, thermal blankets, or even fresh dinghies, all parachuted from low altitude. Walrus seaplanes carried collapsible ladders for quick hoisting from the waves. Even clothing evolved. New immersion suits were tested using volunteer pilots dunked into freezing water for hours. They called them Mae Wests, after the Hollywood actress, because of the life preserver's curving shape. It was gallows humor, but it worked. Each piece of equipment formed a link in an invisible chain. Designed not to fight the enemy, but to fight time and nature themselves. Warfare in 1940 was fought not only with bullets, but with frequencies. The RAF's rescue network operated in a delicate balance. Every transmission risked revealing positions to German direction finders. To counter that, British intelligence introduced a web of coded signals. Rescue messages were transmitted in short bursts, sometimes masked within regular weather or convoy reports. Aircraft pretending to be simple reconnaissance missions often carried observers tracking down pilots. Even the fluorescent dyes had coded meanings: green for friendly, red for suspected enemy. The Germans, noticing these rapid responses, began to send their own false distress signals, attempting to lure British rescue boats into traps. In response, the RAF introduced authentication protocols, prearranged signal sequences only genuine RAF pilots knew. Thus, the battle for survival extended into the invisible realm of radio waves and deception. Behind the front lines, MI9, the British Escape and Evasion Organization, contributed survival maps printed on silk, waterproof, silent, and easily concealed. These maps marked potential landing zones, wind directions, and local currents. Every successful rescue was the product of both coordination and counterintelligence. Precision executed under fire, with secrecy as its armor. From across the Channel, the phenomenon appeared almost supernatural. Luftwaffe pilots watched their adversaries fall into the sea, certain of their deaths, only to encounter the same markings and faces days later in new sorties. German situation reports began to mention British retrieval units of unusual efficiency. General Hans Jeschonek, the Luftwaffe's chief of staff, remarked in frustration, "The English fight as if the sea were their own airfield." The Seenaudienst attempted to imitate the system, but Germany's strategic posture made it impossible. Their aircraft fought over hostile waters, with little coordination between air and naval units. The RAF's advantage lay in homeland defense, proximity, radar coverage, and communication. To the Germans, it seemed that Britain's pilots were unkillable. To the British, it was simple. They never left a man behind. These combined human, tactical, and technological dimensions made one truth undeniable. The RAF wasn't merely defending the skies. It had weaponized rescue itself. August 18, 1940, the day the RAF called the hardest day. The Luftwaffe launched its largest assault yet. From dawn to dusk, waves of bombers crossed the Channel, escorted by tight formations of Messerschmitts. Their target, RAF airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. Fighter Command scrambled every squadron available. Above the southern coast, hundreds of contrails laced the sky. The roar of engines echoed from Dover to Portsmouth. Spitfires and Hurricanes tangled with Dornier and Heinkel bombers, trading altitude for blood. In the chaos, dozens of aircraft went down, friend and foe alike. tumbling into the channel like sparks into water. To the German commanders watching from across the French coast, the outcome seemed clear. By nightfall, they believed they had destroyed more than 100 British fighters. But by morning, many of those same RAF pilots were alive, resting, and ready to fly again. The secret lay in what happened below the clouds. As each plane vanished from radar, operators at Bentley Priory and coastal stations logged its last coordinates. Within minutes, coded signals went out to Air Sea Rescue Command. Motor launches at Dover, New Haven, and Ramsgate throttled up to full speed, cutting through the surf toward the last known position. The rescue crews were volunteers, often civilians, fishermen, lifeboatmen, mechanics, now wearing the blue-gray of the RAF. They raced against time, guided by wireless updates from observation posts along the cliffs. Some even navigated by oil slicks and drifting debris. Above them, a walrus amphibian circled low, its radial engine echoing across the water. From its cockpit, an observer scanned the waves with binoculars. At last, he saw a flicker of fluorescent green, dye spreading like ink beneath the surface. A pilot, alive. The walrus descended, floats skimming the waves, and taxied to the dinghy. The downed pilot, half frozen, managed to raise a gloved hand. He was hauled aboard, teeth chattering, whispering the same phrase every survivor used: "I thought I was done for." By 5 p.m., while the battle still raged in the skies above Kent, the rescued man was back on English soil. By midnight, his debriefing was complete. 2 days later, he rejoined his squadron. German analysts couldn't make sense of it. Reconnaissance photos showed British losses, yet those same units were flying again. Pilots who should have drowned were back in combat. The Luftwaffe's calculated attrition curve, the mathematical path to victory, began to collapse. Each successful RAF rescue didn't just save a man, it denied the enemy a victory. And so, while the Luftwaffe dropped bombs, the RAF deployed lifeboats. Britain's defense was no longer measured in planes destroyed but in pilots recovered. This was the unseen counterattack, silent, mechanical, relentless. A system of eyes, engines, and courage that made the channel itself an ally. As August burned toward September, the Luftwaffe began to realize the scale of what they faced. Intelligence officers were ordered to investigate how Britain's pilots were surviving. What they discovered would shock them and force the German High Command to rethink everything they believed about air warfare. In the weeks after the hardest day, the Luftwaffe's intelligence division began piecing together a mystery. Reports from pilots and coastal observers in occupied France described British rescue craft operating openly in contested waters. Some were even seen retrieving men while dogfights still raged overhead. To the German command, it appeared suicidal, yet the British persisted. A captured RAF pilot later revealed the truth under interrogation. It wasn't recklessness. It was organization. Every airfield, radar station, and coastal command post was part of a synchronized network. The system didn't improvise. It anticipated. By early September, Luftwaffe officers reviewing aerial photographs of Dover Harbor noticed an array of new vessels. Small, fast, and numerous. These were the Type 2 high-speed launches, powered by Rolls-Royce engines, capable of 35 knots. The British called them Sea Spitfires. They were guided by coded radio bursts from downed aircraft and by ground control triangulation. In daylight, walrus amphibians provided air cover for rescues. At night, signal flares and radar pings traced wreckage zones. The entire process, from shoot-down to pickup, could take less than 20 minutes. German flight crews began to realize a cruel asymmetry. When they went down over the channel, their chances of rescue were slim to none. Even if spotted by a scene-audienced float plane, they might drift too far before being reached. British pilots, however, seemed to vanish beneath the waves, only to reappear in combat days later, rested and refueled. Inside the Luftwaffe's planning offices, frustration deepened. Losses were mounting faster than replacements could arrive, yet RAF squadrons, though battered, retained coherence. Every pilot saved meant another skilled warrior in the cockpit, another obstacle to German air supremacy. General Jashonek, reviewing reports, noted the anomaly in disbelief. Enemy personnel losses remain minimal despite operational intensity. This is not possible. But it was. Britain's entire defense structure was built to make it possible. In late August, the Germans attempted to replicate the idea. Steel rescue buoys, nicknamed Rettungsbojen, were anchored across the channel. Floating shelters stocked with food, water, and medical supplies. Downed pilots could climb inside and await pickup. Yet even these efforts faltered. The buoys were static. easily spotted and often bombed by British patrols. They saved few lives. By contrast, the RAF's rescue craft were mobile, responsive, and guided by human coordination rather than luck. One German after-action report from September 1940 captures the growing despair. English pilots seem to fall into the sea without consequence. They return to battle while ours vanish entirely. The sea favors them. That illusion, that the sea itself favored Britain, became part of the Battle of Britain's mythology. But in truth, it was human ingenuity. A network so efficient it blurred the line between miracle and machinery. When the Luftwaffe shifted to bombing London in September, the RAF's fighter losses decreased, not because the Germans grew weaker, but because Britain's rescue machine had fully matured. Pilots who fell returned faster. Morale soared. Fighter command endured. And as the autumn storms rolled in, the tides turned permanently. The Luftwaffe, still convinced it could starve Britain of defenders, now faced an opponent that could replenish itself from the waves. The miracle of survival had become a weapon of war. When the guns fell silent over southern England in October 1940, the skies were scarred but unbroken. Britain had endured. The Luftwaffe had failed to destroy the Royal Air Force, and one of the quiet pillars of that victory lay not in the air, but in the waters below. During the height of the Battle of Britain, over 200 British pilots were rescued from the Channel, men who, by all logic, should have been lost. Many were returned to operational duty within days. That figure may seem small beside the scale of the war, but for fighter command, it was decisive. Every trained pilot represented months of investment, hundreds of flying hours, and irreplaceable experience. Hugh Dowding's system had turned survival into strategy. Air-sea rescue wasn't a humanitarian gesture, it was force preservation. It kept squadrons whole, sustained morale, and created the illusion, to German intelligence, that Britain possessed an endless supply of men and machines. At RAF bases from Biggin Hill to Tangmere, rescued pilots often returned to find their names already wiped from the missing lists. They were greeted not with ceremony, but with tea, a cigarette, and orders for the next sortie. That quiet normality was the heart of the RAF's strength. Endurance without spectacle. For the men who served in the rescue units, there was little recognition. Their missions were perilous, operating under the threat of strafing runs, bombs, and mines. Many never returned, yet their work saved thousands across the war's span. By late 1940, the Air-Sea Rescue Service had grown from a patchwork of local efforts into an organized command within the RAF coastal command structure. The lessons of that summer became doctrine, radar coordination, coded communication, and rapid deployment. Britain's geography had been weaponized. Every harbor, inlet, and airfield turned into a node of survival. German assessments after the campaign concluded that British pilot recovery rates exceeded 70%, compared to roughly 30% for Luftwaffe airmen lost over water. That imbalance eroded Germany's strategic confidence and bled away its experienced fighter corps far faster than anyone in Berlin had anticipated. To the world, the Battle of Britain was won in the air. But to those who knew the full story, part of the victory floated quietly on the waves. As 1941 unfolded, Britain's Air-Sea Rescue Service evolved from an emergency improvisation into a fully professional command, a model soon studied and copied by other Allied nations. What began as coastal watchmen and borrowed launches became a fleet of dedicated high-speed rescue craft, each faster, tougher, and better armed than before. The RAF introduced the Type 63 and Type 72 launches, capable of 40 knots and armed with twin 303 Browning machine guns to fend off enemy aircraft. The service's insignia, a pair of wings over breaking waves, became a quiet symbol of salvation amid the firestorm of total war. By 1942, purpose-built squadrons of Supermarine Walrus and later Warwick aircraft patrolled Britain's coasts, ready to launch at the first radio distress signal. The system extended outward into the Atlantic and Mediterranean, accompanying bomber formations and convoys. Every new front brought new refinements. Better radios, longer-range beacons, more durable suits. The Germans, meanwhile, learned from bitter experience. Their Zenodienst grew more capable, deploying Heinkel Hu-59 rescue seaplanes painted white with red crosses, but those aircraft were vulnerable. The British, suspecting they also performed reconnaissance, began attacking them, blurring the line between rescue and combat. By then, the Luftwaffe's advantage was gone. Its finest pilots were being lost to the same waters that Britain had mastered. The RAF system continued to expand through the later years of the war, saving not only British but also Allied and even German airmen. By 1944, more than 13,000 aircrew had been rescued by the Air-Sea Rescue Service worldwide. These operations rarely made headlines. There were no parades for the men who navigated minefields and storms to find a single drifting speck in the endless gray, but their contribution was immense. They preserved the fighting core of the RAF and embodied a principle Britain carried through every hardship: that no life was expendable if it could still fight for tomorrow. In the cold efficiency of total war, that belief stood out like a flicker of humanity. The Luftwaffe had underestimated Britain's resilience not in the air, but in its will to save. And by the time they realized it, the Channel, once thought a graveyard, had become a living shield. War is often remembered for its destruction: the machines, the bombs, the towering columns of smoke. But sometimes victory rests not in how many enemies a nation destroys, but in how fiercely it protects its own. The RAF's Air-Sea Rescue Service was born not from glory, but necessity. It was a web of humanity woven through the machinery of war, a quiet defiance against the indifference of the sea. Each rescue was a whisper that said, "We will not lose our own to the deep." To the German commanders, it seemed incomprehensible that the British could recover men so quickly, rebuild their strength, and return to the fight almost overnight. But it was never magic. It was method, coordination, communication, and compassion made operational. What the Luftwaffe misjudged was the power of morale. That a pilot who believes he will be saved will fight longer, fly further, and fear less. That belief, multiplied across hundreds of men, became as decisive as any weapon in Britain's arsenal. When the campaign ended, more than 200 RAF pilots had been recovered from the sea, men who, by all logic, should have been lost. The Air-Sea Rescue Service expanded into a formal command within the RAF, its motto simple and defiant: "So that others may live." Through 1941 and beyond, new high-speed rescue launches entered service. Walrus aircraft were joined by Warwicks, better radios, new immersion suits, and improved beacons. The system grew global, stretching from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. By 1944, over 13,000 Allied airmen had been saved. Most of their rescuers remained anonymous. They asked for no medals, no fame, only the satisfaction of knowing one more man would fly again. In a war defined by destruction, they had built a machine for mercy. History remembers the Battle of Britain for its skies, the duels of Spitfires and Messerschmitts above a burning island. But beneath those skies, another battle was fought, silent, unseen, and just as vital. Britain had made the sea its ally, and from that alliance came a truth that transcended victory or defeat: that even in total war, the measure of a nation lies not only in how it fights, but in how it saves.